Hi, everyone. My name is Karen Lowry, and I welcome you to my webinar on educational rights for your child with ADHD. I'm so happy you guys came. I know that this is a very important topic. With all the people that I coach, all the kids that I coach and families, I think the school support is a huge issue. And it seems like many times the schools are not there to support you and your children for various reasons, whether it be because they don't understand ADHD, they don't believe in ADHD, maybe there's a financial issue, I don't know. But what happens is it puts you, the parent, in a position of advocacy. So in order to be the good advocate that you need to be, you all know that you need good information, and that's why I'm here. The best way to advocate for your child is to be equipped with the information that you need. I just want to let you know that what I'm going to do is I'm going to present the webinar, and then I will answer questions at the end. So please feel free to put any questions in the text in the chat box, because I'll come back to that and answer the questions. If for some reason we run way over and I can't get to all of your questions, I certainly will make sure that I email all of the answers to your questions to you, because I do have your emails. I don't want to leave anybody hanging, so I'll do my best to complete all of that within a timely fashion. I want to tell you before I get started, and while we're waiting for a few more people to come, a little bit about me. I'm married, and actually this year, 36 years, I can't even believe that. I have 4 kids, ages 32, 27, 25, and 18. My original path was not just as a mom, but as a registered nurse, and I did work as a pediatric nurse for a while. When my 4th child was born, he was the turning point of my life, and that's when I became interested in ADHD, because even at the age of 2, I knew that he was different, and I knew that I would be going down some journey, and of course at the time I had no idea what that was. So just like the rest of you, he was diagnosed with ADHD, and he also was diagnosed with dyslexia, and I felt desperate and didn't know what to do, who to turn to. Found CHADD, C-H-A-D-D, Children and Adults with ADHD, and they are a nonprofit organization. They have been in existence for about 26 years, and they do support, give information to families like our families, and that's who I turned to. I was so impressed with them, I became a parent-to-parent trainer, and I currently am that as well. And I use these slides. These were developed by this CHADD organization, and they are up-to-date information regarding ADHD and everything that you need to know. So, and then in addition, I went on and became an ADHD coach as well. I feel passionate about this part of coaching and this part of this information regarding educational rights, because I am seeing so many kids falling through cracks, and there is no need for that to be happening. So I want to provide you with as much information as I can. I have been down that journey myself with my child. As I said, he has dyslexia. I have advocated a zillion times every year of his life. I was never a favorite parent, and I called billions and billions of meetings, and yes, was intimidated. They had a special ed almost threw a chair at me. So that's how annoying I guess I was. But I was determined that I would not cry and I would not start a fight. And I did pretty well in those areas too. I never did cry. So anyway, I just wanted to give you a little bit of information so that you know that I certainly do understand, not just from a professional point, but from a very, very personal, emotional side of things. I do understand what you're going through. And the end of the story, well, it's not really the end of the story, but middle of 6th grade, I advocated enough that I did move my child out of district, into a school for learning differences, to give him more of a chance to have choices. And he's now a senior in high school, and he has those choices. Not an easy journey. The journey changes all the time for all the things that we all deal with in a child with ADHD. There's always a challenge. But I can tell you right now, the fact that all of you are on this call, your children are going to be fine, because you are here. You are here to get the information. You are here to make sure that your child is not falling through cracks. So your child's going to be fine. And your child also knows that you are his best advocate. He may not, or she may not say that to you, of course. But they know. They know. And they need you. And that's why you're here. So I think I'll get started. I was trying to give a little bit more time for others to show up as well. Again, questions will be at the end. Midway, I'm going to throw a pop-in in for you. It's just a little PDF that I thought you might find interesting about 504s and IEPs and just education. And then at the very end of all of this, I'm offering everyone a 30-minute free ADHD coaching session. So I guess I'll begin then. And please, again, make sure you write your questions in the chat box. Here are the questions that we are going to answer. What do I do when my child is having difficulty in school? What are early intervening services? What is Section 504? What is the IDEA? And how do I prepare for an IEP or Section 504 meeting at my child's school? Now, this is just showing that, you know, when you're going through all of this journey and trying to help your child, that it really affects so many areas of the community. And everyone really should be communicating and collaborating in a positive manner. Doesn't always happen, but for the best outcome for your child, that's what should be happening. And, you know, as you know, you've got the physicians, the schools, any community activities that your child is involved with, obviously the family, and the teachers. So in the beginning, you see your child having trouble at school. You might meet with a teacher. You might get other people involved. This is very preliminary, and sometimes it is not engraved in stone. This whole process, this part of it might be skipped, but we'll talk about the other services and supports that are there for you. But this is a very preliminary kind of thing, putting some strategies in place, particularly if your child has a very supportive teacher. Off the record, informally, you can have strategies put in place. And obviously, whenever anything is put in place, monitoring is the key. That is the important part here. I see time and time again where kids are failing. Recently talked to a mom whose 12-year-old is failing 3 classes. And interestingly enough, my question to her was, and did they reach out to you to let you know about the stumbling going on with your child? She said, no, I'm the one who reached out to them. So never assume that you're going to get consistent information. Always be monitoring your child. And obviously, like the slide says, don't wait until you get the report card. Then it's kind of too late. What do I do when my child is having difficulty at school? Continuing. If the strategies are unsuccessful, request a referral for an evaluation in writing to the school administrator. Describe academic concerns. If your child has any mental health diagnosis, which ADHD is, the information in the letter, and keep a copy for your files. So I can't tell you how important this is too. I've seen, again, mistakes made by parents who go to their teacher and ask for this kind of an evaluation, or go to a guidance counselor and ask for this evaluation, and nothing is done, or they're just put off and told, I'll talk to you later about it. That's why once you put it in writing, it really has happened. If you verbalize your request, it hasn't really happened. So I can't really emphasize enough how important it is to put this in writing. This also demands an answer. So legally, the school is responsible for answering within a reasonable amount of time. And again, you know, a lot of the stuff that we talk about varies a little bit state to state, and that's the tough part. I always tell parents, like, within a 10-day period. I think that's what I read for New Jersey anyway. I know you are all coming from various states, so it kind of depends on the state what they're mandated to do. But a reasonable amount of time is what the federal law states. So they must respond. And they have options. They can talk about early intervening services, which we will go into detail about. They can talk about 504 accommodations, which we'll talk about, or an evaluation for special education. Or they can refuse. They can say, we don't believe that any intervention is needed at this time. Schools are required to consider a variety of information, including but not limited to parent information, in determining what supports or interventions may be necessary to address your child's needs. And one of the things that I want to point out is that the information that they go by and must go by needs to be observable and measurable. It cannot be where a teacher says, I think he's just kind of lazy. You know, I believe that if he tried harder, he could do better. I've seen him do it days in a row. All of a sudden now he can't do it. If he could have done it 2 days ago, why can't he do it now? I'm sure all of you are nodding your heads and you've heard it all, because that's exactly what you hear time and time again. It's just an excuse. I know he can do it. I know I saw him do it before. So they can't use that kind of information to respond to whether or not a child needs support. That is not allowed. That is not objective data. So it needs to be, again, and these are the things that you see when you realize that there are problems: grades, test scores, observations of classroom behavior, information provided by the parent and the non-school professionals, teacher notes, progress notes, discipline reports, any emails that you got with concern from a teacher, all important information. But what about my child's diagnosis? A diagnosis of ADHD is helpful, but not sufficient in determining the eligibility for services. And I'll say this probably more than once tonight, but that's kind of where the advocacy piece, I think, falls, because the diagnosis alone does not allow you to have what you want. What allows that are the impairments that your child is showing that is limiting his success in academics. And that's the kind of information that you need to prove. That's the kind of information that you need to document in the original letter if, let's say, you're writing a letter for the need for an evaluation. Very important. It is not just that my child has ADHD, I need an IEP. That is not going to fly. The eligibility requirements do not necessarily require a physician diagnosing ADHD. And again, I think this varies from state to state. But again, a physician doesn't necessarily have to be the one that diagnoses. You know, the Office for Special Education Programs does not take a position on whether a medical evaluation is necessary for an eligibility determination. So the decisions on the eligibility part really are made by the educational team and all the data that we just talked about. And again, too, the parent's request for an evaluation does not automatically trigger a district's obligation to evaluate. It's only when the district feels that the disability requires that kind of support, and specifically, I think special ed, which is the outcome of an evaluation. They make that determination, and that's why it's so key, so important to gather the information that we previously talked about regarding every single detail that you can come up with that shows impairment in school. So again, all of you I know are coming from different states, so you have to check the individual state laws regarding eligibility, which means that I think the only, maybe a big difference might be whether your state requires that a physician make the diagnosis of ADHD or not, because the special ed, federal special ed offices do not make that stipulation. Eligibility for school support services is based on school-related performance and behaviors only. A child's functioning at home or outside of school is not sufficient for a consideration of an evaluation. Now, this would be another webinar, but the diagnosis using the DSM for a child with ADHD requires in more than one environment showing the symptoms of ADHD. But what this is saying is, the problems that a child is having, if they're not shown in the school, they're not obligated to deal with it. If it's only a home situation, and if it is, then it's, based on the parameters of the diagnosis of ADHD, then it is not ADHD. It's not really showing up at home and school, both, if you know what I'm saying. Remember, decisions to evaluate must be based on a variety of data. Just like I just briefly said, grades, quizzes, tests, comments about behavior, organizational kinds of things, hugely important are, forgetting to write things down, forgetting to hand in, not bringing home things, not bringing things back. All of that, nothing can escape the importance of the data that you need for this evaluation that you're going after. So this just shows just the population of students in the services. So the regular education students, are, the green part, and then students with problems may or may not be maybe important to allow for a 504 or for an IEP, but it might be something totally different that requires other services that might be, I don't know, medical, those kinds of things. So the 504 are kids with a mental or physical impairment that's limiting their ability to access the educational environment. That's the definition. The kids in that category have a mental or physical disability that limits their access to the educational environment due to learning and or behavioral issues, because those are some of the life's major activities listed, learning, and so if that's the case, accommodations are allowed. And again, we're going to talk about that a little bit more. I'm just kind of giving you an overview here. And then the IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, represents special education, which is based on the IEP that that we're also going to talk about. And that under the IDEA, the child must fit into one of 13 categories, and there must be an adverse effect on learning. There must be significant impairment on learning to require that IEP, which is special education. And that does not necessarily mean, and again, here's the other issue, if you have a child, and this becomes more complicated for the parents. If you have a child with ADHD and dyslexia or language-based learning difference, automatically your child was certainly qualifying for an IEP because of the learning difference. If your child has ADHD and let's say has an evaluation and no learning difference has been noted, many times kids are refused an IEP only because they don't have a learning difference. But that's false, because many times if they have ADHD by itself, it does not necessarily mean that that child's not eligible for an IEP. IEPs don't mean that your child has all Fs. And many times parents are told, well, he's doing okay, he's getting Cs, he's fine. Not necessarily true. Because if he had the modifications that he needs to give strategies and overcome the impairments of ADHD, he would be getting A's, or maybe he'd be getting B's, or maybe if it's left, the C's are left, when he's a sophomore in high school, he's now failing. Because many times as that child moves through the educational system, as you can imagine, the expectations go up, the organizational needs go up, and if they haven't had a chance to develop the strategies that they need, their grades go down. So if you note that there are impairments in the way that they deal with academics, and you can note those kinds of things, they can be eligible for an IEP. So it's just one of the many very difficult issues that I think parents face and need to understand that they can really fight that. Early intervening services. This is before a 504 is put in place or before an evaluation is put in place for an IEP development. I don't think every school district does this, but some of them do. And they put in best practice services for kids who are struggling. I think they have a committee. They look at these kids that are having some problems, and they put in place some supports so that they can monitor that child. And it may be because they're immature, you know, an early birthday, you know, a multitude of things that they can stopgap that issue and that they improve, and then nothing is needed down the road. Now, I would like to know, quite honestly, the percentage of kids that are noted to have problems that are given these early intervening services that move on, succeed, and don't need any further accommodations. I would love to know the percentages. Somewhat skeptical, but I could be wrong. I don't know. I've never heard of this, and I never personally have gone through these early intervening services. I do have a client right now whose son has gone through them as a first grader and is now in second grade and is completely falling through cracks. And the refusal to really grab hold and do an evaluation has wasted a lot of time. So I don't know. I'm not saying that it doesn't work, but I can tell you what, if this is going to happen and you're going to accept this, I think the most important thing is to monitor it. So here's the definition before I go into that. Early intervening services, they're implemented by this response to intervention. So it is the practice of providing high quality instruction, providing interventions matched to the student need, monitoring progress frequently, and using the child's performance data to make important educational decisions. And like the example I am giving you with the current parent that I'm dealing with, they were easily able to say that the early intervening services showed improvement in the child. But what they weren't able to really admit was that this child with his significant ADHD impairments had very erratic improvements. So the mom saw no improvements. She was still struggling with all of that support at home that we all feel like we have to do, that kind of masks a little bit of what's going on at home. And the amount of hours being spent on some of the learning going on was way beyond what district policy states. So it did necessitate a good long IEP meeting, or it wasn't an IEP meeting, but it was a meeting to move on and go away from response intervention. Because, you know, that's the problem. You can do this, but you have to look at so many areas. You can't just look at one area and say, okay, see, it's working. You have to look at all of the areas. You know, how is he performing on a daily basis in all of the subjects, and how is he performing at home? And what's also the level of frustration? What's the self-esteem issue going on as well? So there's a lot of things to look at. And just looking at one thing where it is documented that he's moving on a little bit may or may not be right. So if this has been suggested to you for your child, I'm not saying that it's not worth trying, depending on the severity of the impairments. That's the tough part. If it's pretty significant, then it may not be something worth trying. If the school isn't really pushing it, and you don't want to argue with them because it's just not really worth it, what I would do is at least limit the time frame. If you're going to do response to intervention, come to an agreement with how long you're willing to go through this, and also how often will the monitoring take place. Really important. So the goals: preventing the child from falling behind, like I said, delivery of scientifically research-based interventions, and the response to those interventions to determine appropriate supports and the need for more intensive individualized instruction. So we're going to move on to the 504. The 504 is part of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and it is designed to prevent any form of discrimination for eligible students with a disability, whether it be mental or physical. Parents may request accommodations to level the playing field for eligible students with a disability. It is a civil rights law. There is no funding to public schools from the government. No extra money for this. Special ed is a whole different ballgame. So again, it prevents discrimination, and it is just providing the individual with an equal opportunity in the face of a disability. And I know one time a parent was in a meeting and she was actually told by a principal, and this was not that long ago, that no, her child could not have a 504 because he did not have a physical disability. Can you just imagine? She knew that was wrong, but she was intimidated and didn't say anything. But yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine that a principal really, really believed that and really didn't know the truth behind that. But it is both physical and mental. And here is this very specific definition. A disabled person is one who has a physical or mental impairment which substantially limits one or more major life activities. Has a record of impairment, is regarded as having such an impairment. And like I said, it is about the degree of impairment, not the diagnosis. The degree of impairment is very, very important. Here are the major life activities that we're talking about. The ones in red are relatively new major life activities that we're talking about. So pretty much for our purposes in dealing with ADHD, we're most often concerned with how ADHD impacts life activities of learning and behavior, the ones in blue. Those are our major life activities that we look at when we're talking about accommodations under 504. So again, the question is, does a student have a mental or physical impairment? If yes, then the second question of whether that impairment results in a substantial limitation in one of life's major functions. All decisions must be determined without benefit of mitigating measures. So here's factors that determine the limitation. because again, you know, that's not, it's kind of not measurable. Does the impairment result in failure or underachievement when compared to their same age non-disabled peers? Because the 504 regulations do not specifically define what is substantially limiting. So this is what schools look at. Does the impairment impact a major life activity, which we've just talked about? Does the impairment last at least 6 months? And will the impairment disappear without any intervention from the school? And here are some accommodations. Now remember too, when we're talking about 504 accommodations, we're talking about regular education. They are still subject to regular ed expectations. They are non-special ed under the 504 accommodations. So this is regular ed, but accommodations that are leveling the playing field. Tailoring homework assignments, just meaning that they can't complete the homework assignments within like a 5-hour period. Some kids go on and on and on with homework, and it's not right. So it should be tailored so that the homework can be done within district policy. Generally, what I've seen, district policy is 10 minutes per grade level. So for instance, if you have a 3rd grader, that 3rd grader should be able to do his homework in about a half an hour. And other than that, he should be done. And that's what we're working on now. It's important to have that kind of information because the school needs to know and be able to see when the homework is not being done within a reasonable amount of time. So if your child just stops at the point of, let's say, that half an hour, this is what my child got done tonight within district policy. It's just another example that you might need down the road for further evaluation. So it's just really a documentation of how long it is taking for homework assignments. Changing the way a test is given. Whether it is given orally, it's given in a different room, in another setting, away from distraction. Whether a child needs a scribe. Simplifying instructions about assignments. Providing a copy of peer notes. And supplementing verbal instructions with visual instructions. Using behavioral management techniques. Oral testing, as I said. Using tape recorders. Computer-aided instructions. And nursing services. I'm just going to put up a quick pop-in here so you can see my little 504 help guide. And I'll just leave that up here now. You can feel free to download that at any time. Many, but not all school systems have annual meetings with parents to develop a child's Section 504 plan. And here's the difference with 504s, one of the many differences with 504s and IEPs. Parental involvement is not required by federal law. So, I mean, I've not ever seen this, really. I mean, generally schools have parents involved with the development of a 504, but they can develop a 504 without you even knowing about it. They can just go ahead and do it. It's not necessary. Whereas, like for an evaluation, you must sign for it. IEPs, there must be annual meetings, that kind of thing. This is a very loose kind of a plan. Your preparation and follow-up for these meetings will have a major impact on the outcome. And that is absolutely true. Because I can tell you that 504s coming from schools many times are cookie cutter. They have maybe a list of 4 accommodations that are all the same, that I've seen billions of times. Extra time, preferential seating. Those are the 2 big ones, actually. So what my concern is that many times the accommodations don't fit the child. So you know your child better than anyone. That's why this is so important. You know your child. You know the struggles that child is having. So make the 504 plan his plan. Individualize that plan. Even though when you're doing an IEP, that's a whole other deal under the special ed law. That too should be individualized, but you're mandated to have goals that really kind of force the issue generally. But a 504 plan does turn into a very general kind of plan unless you, the parent, are involved. Pay attention to all the parent tips in the segment coming up on the IEP meetings. While your rights may be different, the process is similar, and that is actually true. So that's what we're going to go into. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the IDEA. It is known as special ed. It does provide federal funding to school districts. Provides eligible students with disabilities with special education and related services to meet their individual needs. Now, one thing I want to just bring out to you, which is just important to keep this in mind. Just remember that special ed describes a range of services, and it doesn't necessarily mean that if your child has an IEP, that he will be pulled out of the regular classroom and put in a resource or a behavioral classroom. It means specially designed instruction at no cost to the parents to meet the unique needs of that disability. Who is eligible under the IDEA? The child must meet the eligibility criteria in at least one of 13 categories. And, well, this will come up, but, you know, for ADHD, the category is OHI, other health impairment. That is the category for ADHD. Now, you might have more than one, of course. If your child is learning disabled, that's one of them as well. The disabling condition must adversely affect the child's educational performance, creating an educational need, and the child must be in need of special education and related services. What is educational need? Educational need requires that the child must show evidence of a need for special education services by an inability to progress in a regular education program. Educational need is not limited to academics. This is the big statement here. Don't let school administrators or anyone else tell you that that is not true. It also includes behavior and or lack of appropriate social skills. Those kinds of things that are creating academic limitation in your child with ADHD can mandate an IEP. You do not have to have a string of Fs on your report card to mandate an IEP. You do not. They can be academically on track. Students, again, with behavioral problems may present an educational need for special ed and related services even though they are academically on grade level. If the student has a disability which is adversely affecting the student's education to the degree that the student needs specially designed instruction in the area of behavior, the student may qualify for special education. So you may need functional behavioral assessment by a behaviorist to assess what are the triggers creating the behaviors that you want to get rid of in the classroom. That's kind of the best way to come up with a really good behavior plan, and that is inserted in the IEP. And here are all the categories that I was talking about. And the ones in red are the ones that pertain to our kids. Other health impairment, Serious emotional disturbance. Sometimes I think they're labeled like that before they're really diagnosed with ADHD. Not all the time. Sometimes it's something different. But really, other health impairment is ADHD and specific learning disabilities. Does a student exhibit to a marked degree the qualifications of other health impaired? Is the condition due to a chronic disorder? If yes, does this condition result in limited alertness, which may include a heightened alertness to environmental stimuli? So see what I'm saying here? They're limited in the alertness to what is going on in the classroom because they are so distracted in the current environment and in what's going on in the classroom. And that's creating a limited alertness to what is supposed to be happening in the classroom, in the area of academics. If yes, does the condition adversely affect the child's educational performance to the extent of creating an educational need? So again, there are states that do require a prescription from a doctor indicating other health impairment. So it's a shame that we can't all be the same, but each state has a little bit of a different rule. It's just important for you to know what that is, that's all. What is the process used in special education? The first one, is the student suspected of having a disability? And then here's where you're putting that in writing, as we have talked about. If you have your child involved with that response to intervention, the intervening services, which are not special education services, remember, that was just in the very beginning of trying to put some structure in place or some kind of a strategy in place to hopefully improve their success. You do have a right to refer your child to special ed at any time if you've decided that you don't see the response to that intervention happening. The goals are not being met. And I think, too, when you do this in writing, it's always really, I think, important to put in there the expectation of when you want this meeting. So, so the notice of rights and parental consent. Once the referral is received, the district must provide the parents with a written notice, a copy of their rights, and obtain written consent to evaluate. And hopefully that's their agreement to evaluate. The written notice means that the school is letting you know whether or not they are agreeing or not to evaluate your child. If they say no, they are required to tell you why they made that decision. So the written notice has to include the action the school wants to take or is refusing to take, why the school wants or refuses to take that action, descriptions of any evaluations, tests, reports, and other information supporting the school's position, sources for parents to contact for assistance in understanding what the law says, information about the parents' rights, and other options. So they have to give you that information if you decide to go to due process, if you don't agree with the school. That's, of course, a last resort, and it's not anything anyone ever wants to do. But they have to let you know that. And here's the process that we're kind of really alluding to, the evaluation, the information gathering, the meeting, and presumably that the evaluation showed the need for an IEP, the IEP meeting and the design of the IEP, the implementation of the IEP, and Yeah, so the implementation of it as well. The evaluation must focus on the identified problem and must contain a variety of sources for information. This includes parent information such as outside independent evaluations, medical information. Evaluations must be completed by the school within 60 calendar days after the receipt of the written parent consent. So apparently, at least for New Jersey, it is actually 90 days if it's the first evaluation. I found that out recently. I thought it was 60, and I see 60 if you look under the Department of Education, but apparently it is, I found out it's 90 calendar days from the time the parent signs the consent for an evaluation, which is really a shame. That's a long time, and you can see what happens. A whole half year goes by when you're going through this process. Once the evaluation is completed and before the meeting scheduled to discuss, request a copy of the evaluation report and read it. If you have questions, ask the school to explain the report. That's really important. You need to have the evaluation before you meet so you can take a look at it and figure out what questions that you have. It should include present levels of academic achievement and related developmental needs, any problems the student has with school subjects and skills, how your child compares to other students of the same grade level in knowledge of the general education curriculum, and the reason for the child's problems in school, including relevant cognitive and behavioral factors. Before the IEP meeting, decide who you will bring with you to attend the IEP meeting. And I can't stress that enough. Early on, when I was not too aware of this on my own, I didn't have people yelling at me to tell me to bring someone. I went to these meetings alone a lot. It's really a good idea if you can bring, and I'm not talking about necessarily bringing an advocate or a lawyer. Anyone with another set of eyes and ears is really important because it is a very emotional time and also somewhat intimidating, I think, and you can, as a parent, miss things. So it's not what you want to happen. Another possibility, you can or either bring someone or record the meeting. You can do that as long as you let them know you're recording the meeting. I've never heard them say no. I've never heard a school say no, you can't. And it becomes important, especially if you're going by yourself. And I had a situation where a grandmother who I have and still do go to school meetings with, I couldn't make that, and she recorded it, and she let me listen to the recording. And it was regarding her grandson being accused of bullying, and there was a whole bunch of stuff going on. And listening to the recording allowed me to realize that there were some inconsistencies that I was able to bring up in the next meeting, and it was very important to have that information. And if you're in the meeting, you're not going to necessarily pick up those inconsistencies. Decide if you want to meet with the teacher or diagnostician before the IEP meeting. Read your notice to see what issues will be discussed by the school and who will attend. And before that meeting, you should get a notice in the mail specifying, confirming the date and time and who is attending. These are just some possible people who would be at the meeting. Generally, well, the student's not going to be there. Depending on the state, sometimes it's 14. If the student's 14 or maybe 16, depending, can participate in an IEP meeting. But prior to that, no. Regular education teacher, usually a case manager, sometimes a social worker, a learning consultant might be there, or the case manager. She can interpret the evaluation results. Another special ed teacher maybe. Sometimes a principal, sometimes not, kind of varies. So again, you, even though you don't feel like it, are a member of your child's IEP team. Most definitely. Always remember that. You belong in that meeting, you contribute to that meeting, and they have to have you there, and they have to listen to you. Yes, it's important to develop a positive working relationship with the team from the beginning. And it's always good to reinforce the work that they are doing on behalf of your child. But again, remember, and they need to also respect the fact that you know your child better than anyone else. And you must be at that meeting. If you can't be at the meeting, the school has to use other methods, such as, well, either changing the time or date, or having telephone conference calls or video conferences in order for you to participate. The only way that you're not going to be participating is if you don't respond. They can have the meeting without you if you don't respond. Also remember that it is mandated that the IEP, that you have an annual IEP meeting. So minimally, once your child has an IEP, you meet once a year. But you can call an IEP meeting at any time. And, you know, certainly when it's a new IEP, I can't imagine that you wouldn't be calling a meeting several times in a year, because the tough part of this journey, I mean, it's tough enough to get to this point many times, but once you have it, now the tough part is going through the journey and documenting and observing and making sure that everything in it is working. The goals are working, the plan is working. And that's where you all need to pay attention, teachers as well as you with a parent. Sometimes tweaks to the IEP, if it's all agreed upon by you know, all of the professionals, can be done over the phone. Sometimes if it's a small tweak. I've done that personally too, where we tweak something over the phone. If it's a bigger issue, then you want to meet with them. If you want to bring a picture of your child or goodies, do it. I never did that. But pick your battles wisely. Be prepared to negotiate. Yeah, there's a fine line there too. It depends. That's a tough one. It depends. But you know, you do appreciate the fact that they're dealing with lots of kids and lots of issues and all of that too. But also too, you're there for your child, and legally that child is there for FAPE, which is actually on my PDF that I just posted, free and appropriate public education. And in order to have that, if those supports are not in place, they're not following the law. So it's not fair for you to hear that I'm going to try to do this, but I have X, Y, and Z to do in my classroom, and I don't have a lot of help. Tough, you know, boots on the ground teachers have a lot of tough things going on, but that is not pro-law. That is not what the federal law states. The IEP team meets to determine eligibility, appropriate programming for your child, and placement. So hopefully you've had the evaluation, then the programming is you know, coming up with a good IEP. Again, parent input is critical. Don't hesitate ever to make suggestions for consideration by the team. And I've seen many teams who are very appreciative of parent input. The IEP team must meet at least once a year, as I had said. Be prepared to be an active participant in this development of your child's IEP. Again, sometimes after an evaluation and the IEP meeting is set, don't feel intimidated when you go and you find that they've already developed the IEP, because you're supposed to have input to that. So remember that whether they started it or they thought they finished it and they just wanted you to sign it, Don't be intimidated by that, because realize that you are a part of this development and you can add to it, tweak it, and change it. In the IEP, there should be a present level of performance. Academic, social, behavioral, developmental. If you don't have a present level, you don't know where you're going. There should be strengths. I never see strengths in an IEP, but there should be strengths. Parent concerns. Discussion should also include goals. Again, don't always see these in IEPs either, but they're not following the law. If they're not measurable annual goals, if you don't have goals to measure, how can you know whether the IEP is working? Educational services to be provided, specifically. Method for assessing progress toward those goals. How are we going to know that the goals are being achieved? Transition planning for those 16 and over. In other words, what is going to be happening to, what does this child want to do? Is this child getting ready to go to college? Is this child going to some other kind of school? Is this child taking a year off? That kind of planning, and why. Because side note too, just again, this would be another webinar, but moving on to college, the IEP doesn't move on to college. Only a 504 does. That's a whole new conversation, but it is surprising to parents to hear that. But what happens is when you go, let's say your child's going to college, you have to have all your ducks in order as far as recent testing, within a 3-year period. And that testing has to show the disability so that the 504 plan can be in place in college. Those accommodations can be in place. I just bring that up because of that transition age. So again, the IEP is an individualized education program written for your child, very individualized. They must indicate what the child's going to do for the child, the school's going to do for the child, not what the child is going to do. Keep it simple. The IEP must address all of your child's school-related needs, not just those for which he or she has been referred. This includes behaviors that occur at school as well, because behaviors interfere with learning, or they can be disruptive, obviously, to other students. So the IEP must address those behaviors. So they must identify appropriate positive behavioral interventions and supports and other strategies, and preferably in a specific behavior plan. And again, side note, recently in a school meeting, the grandmother called the meeting because behaviors were creating a problem, and her grandson was getting all sorts of demerits. And so when we went to the meeting, I discovered that what had been a while ago, or I think the previous year, was no longer. What was happening was the behavior plan was a class-wide plan in place. And so we talked about that, and here's a child that we fought for a functional behavioral assessment that's individualized for him. So the plan needs to be for him. So you're not going to get anywhere with a child with significant behavior problems if you're following a classroom-wide plan. There needed to be a plan in place specifically for him, specifically for maybe 1 or 2 goals of behaviors that you want to erase. And so that is actually being in the process of being developed now. But I think that's very important to realize that as well. If you disagree with the IEP, put it in writing after the meeting as well as voicing your concerns during the meeting. Make sure the minutes reflect your concerns. Ask to see and receive a copy of the minutes before you leave the meeting. I mean, that's if people are keeping minutes. I don't always see anyone keeping minutes, but I think that, you know, you keep the minutes. And it's also helpful, again, if you're recording. And then following this meeting, always write a letter, an email, and send it to the team. This is what I believe happened at this meeting. These are the following points were made. These are the things that were added to the IEP. These are the things that were said. These are concerns. These are things we're going to change. All really important to this journey. You need to make sure we're all on the same page. Things that you believe happened in that meeting. Then they must respond, either confirm or change or whatever. But again, this way you're all on the same page as far as what everyone believed. And again, I know we're running a little bit late. There's just so much information, so I'm going to try to move a little faster and get to the end, because I know people have questions and I don't want to leave you hanging. Most learners can succeed without being taught strategies. Most children with ADHD cannot survive without them. After the meeting, make sure both you and the teacher have received a copy of the IEP that has been developed for your child. Set up routine communications with the school to keep track of your child's progress or problems. Huge, very, very important. Don't leave that meeting until you make sure, how are we going to communicate? How often will we communicate? Will it be you communicating for, like, especially if your child is in junior or high school and you've got several teachers, will it be this one person who gathers information and I talk to on Friday? How will this happen? How can we watch the progress of my child as we tweak this IEP? Give positive feedback to teachers and administrators about the things that work well for your child during the school year. Be a resource. Meaning, again, you know the child better than they do. Stay actively involved. Skills learned at school need to be reinforced and supported at home. That's why you're in touch. You're in touch because you're monitoring the IEP and you want to be involved. Not that you want to be the homework Nazi and have your child sitting at the desk for 5 hours. That happens so much. But you are reinforcing skills and monitoring, you know, what's going on at home and staying within district policy. Schedule, you know, along with the IEP meeting is just a simple parent-teacher conference if there's one class that he's, you know, falling off the earth with, falling through the crack that you need to talk to. Read all the progress reports, obviously save all of those. Call IEP meetings when you need to. Yeah, again, save everything. If at all possible, differences should be worked out through the IEP process. However, the following options are available to parents. You can request an independent educational evaluation, which means that you might not agree with the school's evaluation or just have some concerns and you just want another one. You can request it. They may or may not agree to pay for it, though. You can request mediation, which, again, it just depends on your state where the mediator comes from. And it's just really trying to pull the school and you together and kind of negotiating if you don't believe that the support is happening. I personally have been through mediation. Again, it's not anything you really want to have to do, but it was somewhat helpful in the whole journey of the process. Although I didn't get everything in the beginning, in the end I got what I wanted. You can file a complaint if you think that there's a reason to file a complaint. There's always someone to reach out to. And request a due process hearing as well. And again, that's kind of really you know, it's not anything you want to have to do. It's very, very expensive, and you don't want to have to do that. But people do. People have to. Sometimes you start it and then you don't have to finish it because the school doesn't want to go through that either. So in general, a 504 provides a faster, more flexible procedure for obtaining accommodations and services for children with disabilities, particularly for children with less serious disabilities. 504s certainly do work. They do, but they don't work for everyone. IDEA offers a wider range of service options, procedural safeguards, and includes written parental consent and involvement. The procedural safeguards for due process and discipline are far more meaningful for IDEA, particularly for a child with behavioral challenges. And that's where, yes, you can have some behavioral kinds of incentives, reinforcement plans in a 504, you can. But if they're really significant issues, that is really where the child's more eligible for an IEP. And again, I realize I'm kind of speaking, you know, kind of subjectively, I guess, when I'm talking about, you know, what is more challenging behaviorally than another, you know. But I think, you know, I think everyone can figure it out if it becomes a daily issue and a real serious kind of thing that holds back academic success. I think it becomes pretty evident how significant it is and how eligible that child is for an IEP. These are just... So accommodations and modifications are meant to help your child within the area of his or her disability. They are not a reflection on your child's intelligence or strengths. Of course, the child does not believe that. Many times feeling unsupported, feeling very low self-esteem. That's why this is such a huge issue, making sure that things are in place so that he does feel smart, feels good, because they are. They are smart. Your student is still expected to learn age-appropriate grade-level curriculum and is responsible to do the schoolwork assigned by the teacher. What my child should know. Your child needs to know when to ask for help and what people can provide that help. And that's a journey. And again, that is something that some of us kind of, I wish I had actually done more of that. I think we sometimes get so involved with advocating for our child that we sometimes forget that we need to teach that child self-advocacy skills as well. And that is really important. And that is not an easy thing. But it is something they need down the road. He or she needs to know who to talk to when an accommodation plan or an IEP isn't being implemented. Having a disability is not an excuse for bad behavior. The student is still subject to the school student code of conduct. And I actually had a mother ask me that question. I really don't want to say a whole lot to my child about ADHD because I don't want him to think that it's an excuse for anything. And I said, well, I think that it is how it's presented. You know, it is a disability. It is a reason for faltering in certain areas, but it isn't that you can not be responsible for your actions. That is something that you can be taught through strategies. So it's kind of how you present it. But again, I think a child has to understand too what is going on with him, because then he can better understand, you know, how he can evaluate himself and better understand who he is and how he can move forward. Make sure your child understands the student code of conduct rules. It's all about the kids. Hopefully we've answered all of these questions about intervening services, 504s, IDEH. And I'm going to hop on over here and see if any of you have any questions. I'm going to remove this offer, and you can sign up for a free coaching session whenever you want to. And I think I am available for questions. if any of you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box, and I'll give you some time. And again, I have put down the download too for the 30-minute coaching session. Hopefully all of you downloaded my PDF on 504s and IEPs. And I'll wait a little bit to see if anyone has any questions. Also, too, you can always please feel free to email me. I know it's on my website with questions if you think of them later. And I'll check the chat room to see if anyone has any questions. I guess I'm not seeing the chat. Hold on a minute here. Hold on a minute here. Sorry, guys. I'm just trying to. Oh wait, here's the chat box. I'm sorry. Oh, here we go. I had a little technical difficulty. I'm sorry. Oh, my goodness. All right. So let me see. Oh, I think what I'll do is I'll just read. I'll just read the question. I'm say, you know, who's asking me the question, so that because everyone can. So everyone can, you know, understand what I'm answering. And also, too, just as a reminder, I do have a 30-minute consulting session that you can also click on as well. So one of the questions is, we just started the evaluation process, and they've already suggested RTI. They say they'll try it for 4 to 6 weeks. Let's say the evaluation says he doesn't qualify for a 504 or IEP and the RTI is not successful. Do we ask for another evaluation? All right, so I guess I'm gathering from you that they're going to go ahead and do an RTI for 46 weeks, but they have agreed to do an evaluation after that if that is not successful. Well, I think that the evaluation, when you're saying if the evaluation doesn't qualify for a 504 and IEP, that would mean, number one, that the evaluation is not showing learning disability. And so what you're saying then is, and when I see this all the time, that the child doesn't have a learning disability, but has ADHD and doesn't qualify for either. Well, if you have started this process and there's an RTI in place, obviously there's some problems. So there has to be some kind of qualification for either one of them, or the struggles that are being seen prior to the RTI are still there and they have to be dealt with. So I would not let them off the hook on that one. I would, again, be very specific about what kinds of struggles They're doing them simultaneously. So they're doing the RTI and the evaluation. Okay, that's good. That's actually really good. So I would say that if you have listed the struggles that you see in your child that require this evaluation, and they must see it too, or they wouldn't have had agreed to it or have done the RTI, then that child is going to minimally qualify for a 504. And actually, well, they're doing the RTI, so they're not going to do a 504. So I would say that he's going to have to qualify for something. And, you know, quite honestly, if the RTI is not successful, I would doubt that a 504 would be successful too, because both of those are somewhat loose. You know, they're not like fully structured, and I would be concerned that if an RTI is not working, I don't know how in the world a 504 is going to fully fix the problem. The other option you would have is maybe do an independent evaluation. So do an evaluation outside of the school, because yes, you can kind of be suspicious maybe a little bit if you've got something going on in the school and it is not they're not totally. I mean, I can't really accuse people of that, but I think sometimes in some cases there might be some people who are not going to be objective. So I would, and I have done this, I would go for an independent evaluation. Yeah, they're not cheap. They're expensive. They're $1,500, a couple thousand. May or may not be covered by insurance. But I think that, and you can ask for coverage. They may or may not cover that evaluation. But if you're feeling concerned about that evaluation, you could ask for another one. That's what I would suggest. But certainly if the RTI is not successful, he certainly has something going on. And they're not going to agree to another in-house evaluation. So I would go for an independent, if that answered your question. Yeah, accommodations for a child struggling in math and writing, organization, those kinds of things. Well, I guess the struggling in math, that's a tough one. I mean, that could be anything. It could be the fact that he might even need a tutor for math as well, so that could be a side thing. Accommodations, though, really talk about, you know, you're still trying to do the work, you just need leveling of the playing field kind of thing that relates to his disability being ADHD. So could it be that if he is bringing that stuff home and he's taking too long, he needs less amount of homework? So kids are getting 20 problems, he gets maybe 8 problems. Because the struggle part could be related to the fact that, first of all, our kids are spent by the time they get home. They've tried to keep it together in school, and then they come home, and the last thing in the world they want to do is homework. So sometimes, you know, the focus, the working memory issues, all of these executive functioning skills that they really, many of them struggle in, impact their ability to do that kind of homework. So if you're talking about math related to homework issues, then I would say minimize it as an accommodation. In writing, if you're talking about difficulty getting ideas from your head to the paper, and that happens a lot, then, you know, that might even require an IEP as well. But I think for an accommodation, sometimes a scribe can help, where a child is able to verbalize and come up with ideas. They just can't do all of that process. They can't think of it and then get it down on paper too very easily. And organizational issues, that's always tough too, trying to figure out what you can use to better help organize. It depends on what he's having trouble with. I have found that it's not an easy deal to have, you know, the binders with the dividers, because they're not going to be bothered opening and closing and putting and punching holes, and it's just a nightmare. So I think organizationally, I always like to suggest, separate folders for each subject. And then you might have a homework folder. There's a lot of organizational kinds of ideas like that. You might need, if he's having trouble with organization, meaning not remembering to hand things in the 504 plan, there could be some cueing by the teacher so that it is handed in. There could be cueing regarding writing down homework because sometimes they don't remember that it's on the board, or actually they don't have time because they also have transition issues. So I think sometimes teachers don't really give anybody enough time to actually process what's on the board to write it down. And that's another issue. So that accommodation of, and that really can be even in an IEP too. But again, it's really holding their feet to the fire more when you have an IEP, that you have time before or after class to be able to write that stuff down. Okay, so I guess the booklet is not downloading, so we'll email it to everyone. The booklet is only one page. It's not really a booklet. It's just a page. So if you're downloading it and you're getting a page, it's okay. That's what it is. It's a very simple page of facts that I thought were interesting. PTSD and ADHD or ADD symptoms mimic. Could I get a 504 in this case? We have an IEP for almost 1 year now. She has a high IQ but performs below grade level. If you have an IEP, then you don't need a 504. IEP encompasses whatever you would get in a 504. If that answers your question. Examples of measurable goals and methods for assessing them throughout the year. Well, measurable goals. Let me think about it. I should have come to this webinar with an example because I see them all the time, and then now I'm being asked, and now I'm like kind of blank. But let's say in the reading area, if you know your child is 2 years behind. So let's say your child's in 5th grade and he's reading at a 3rd grade level. So the child study team knows how to make assessments for that. They know the level of reading. They know a lot of times they'll measure through fluency. There is, believe it or not, which I always struggle with, there's a connection with fluency and comprehension. So they a lot of times will measure based on fluency, the reading abilities, and also if your child is, got decoding issues, that's a whole other ballgame that they have to have a scientific accepted best practice to use for that child's struggle in decoding, which could be, one is called Wilson. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. So that specifically, if you're actually focusing on the decoding, there's actually different levels. So you might say, by, like in September, by the end of December, Johnny will have completed, 3 levels of Wilson. So that would be very objective because there are levels and they can monitor that. So that's decoding, and they like I said, they do look at fluency as well. So I think it's important then when you're looking at an IEP, if they make that comment that your son will increase his reading ability by 1 year by May, then your question then is, how will we know he's achieved that? That's not measurable. How are we going to know that? And it's up to them as the child study team to tell you what tools they're using to monitor that so that they know that if by May he has not achieved a full year, then either the goal was not realistic or the tools they're using are not working. Or maybe they're working, but they need to introduce them more frequently. There needs to be more sessions. You know what I'm saying? So it really depends on, you know, whatever struggles that child has, what tools you're going to use to monitor whether he's made it there or not. You know, sometimes there might be a goal of, you know, especially if you want your child to use technology because of handwriting issues or processing issues or whatever, there might be goals of, you know, being able to type X number of words a minute, and that certainly can be monitored too. Let me see if there's other new questions. Okay, let me just say this. My daughter is 10 and is getting ready to go to middle school. I'm not sure if she should continue on into special ed. She says she's ready for regular class, but I'm afraid she will get frustrated. Should I let her transition? So your child has an IEP now, and she's wanting to discontinue that. She's ready for regular class. I guess my question would be, all right, so you said, I've also been trying to change her at her current school, but the parent coordinator says she's not ready. And she might not be ready. I guess I would ask that coordinator why she believes she's not ready. You know, it kind of depends on, like, you don't need opinions. You need black and white fact. So what the goals are and where she is right now in the areas of reading and writing, where is she? That would be my question. And also, too, if you're talking about regular class, so I'm like assuming that maybe she's pulled into resource rooms. And another least restrictive environment would be an inclusive class. You know, an inclusive class where you're in a regular classroom, but in that class there's a regular teacher and there's a special ed teacher. So I'm wondering if the middle school has that set up. They should, because least restrictive environment is very important. And many times kids don't need resource rooms. She could function very well as long as she has, you know, the other teacher in the classroom who monitors, you know, a handful of kids with IEPs in that regular ed classroom. So it certainly is a possibility to transition, but I would be very careful and understand where she is right now, what goals she has met, what she's trying to meet, where she is with it. And also, it wouldn't be a bad idea to go over to the middle school as the parent and see what options you have regarding inclusion classes, to see if maybe that would be a way to transition her. Hopefully that answered some of your question. That's a hard one, and yeah, I think you have to be very careful with that. And your gut feeling about being afraid she'll get frustrated is absolutely correct. Be really careful about that. I would be very careful, because here's the other thing. Your child's going into middle school, which means that we're now jumping into several teachers and changing classes and all of those organizational skills and transitioning that our kids struggle with. So you're massively changing the load on her day. So I would be very careful about whipping away any kind of support. But I can understand too that if she wants to be in the class, that a way of transitioning might be in an inclusion class. But again, I would check out the middle school and see what kind of setup they have to really make an educated, you know, decision for her. Can I ask for my son to be evaluated for a learning disability through the school? Absolutely. That's what the educational evaluations always are assessing for the learning disability. they are not allowed, they can't assess for ADHD. They might see red flags in the testing, but they're not diagnosing a medical disorder. They are looking for learning disabilities in those evaluations. And again, remember what we talked about. Put that request for evaluation in writing with all of the reasons why you believe that it's important to do that. And although this isn't a reason, or they wouldn't accept it, but an ADHD diagnosis comes with extremely high, between 40 and 50% possibility of a dyslexia diagnosis too. So the probability is right up in there. So it's important to, if you see those red flags, then yes, they should be evaluating. My son has the same problem with writing sentence as well. Yeah, it's pretty common. It may or may not be related to a learning disability. It may be also ADHD related. We who can write, think of something and put it on paper, don't think of it. Don't think anything of it. But those kids who are struggling, you know, we don't realize the multitasking that has to go on in their heads. You know, it's formulating the idea. It's, you know, pulling the words together. It's impacting working memory, which kids with ADHD have a problem with. Holding information in their head, using part of it, that's all happening. And then being able to, many times, also they have trouble processing. Now imagine this. I'm not even talking about a child with a learning disability. I'm talking about a child with ADHD. That's how much people don't understand our children. You can have ADHD and have trouble writing a paragraph, and it has nothing to do with a learning disability. They have ADHD, and they're having trouble with that, and they need strategies for that. And so a child like that, first of all, I think needs testing. Second of all, needs support services like speech and language. Speech and language is not only for speech impediments. Speech and language is also for comprehension, for writing, learning to use graphic organizers to come up with ideas and putting sentences together, you know, those kinds of things. My 14-year-old would fail language arts if it wasn't for spelling and vocab. He does horrible with comprehension and writing. School sees nothing wrong because of his grade. He has a lot of frustration leading to rages when trying to do book reports. He can't write a simple sentence that makes sense. I always have to help him, which isn't helping him any. Right, exactly. And listen, I did the same thing, because you don't want your child to be embarrassed. You think you're helping them and getting through all of it. You just can't do it anymore. You can't do it anymore. He has to learn how to write, and the school has to see it, and you have to be able to document it. And that's so incredibly important. And you know what? When you write the letter asking for an evaluation for a learning disability, document everything you just told me. Document what happens. Document the sentence issue. Document what you're doing to support him. Document how long it's taking to write a paragraph, not to mention a book report. That's really important, because they cannot ignore the documentation of those kinds of issues. They can't. So you have to put all of that in writing, and you have to stop enabling. And you're not enabling him. You're enabling the school to walk away. That's what you're doing. So you got to put that in your head. Like, you're not hurting him. You're enabling the school to turn their backs on him, and you can't let that happen anymore. So I would put immediately tomorrow, write a letter, document everything that's happening in this area, ask for, you know, a meeting to discuss evaluation, put a date on it, like a week from tomorrow, and you'll get a response. So I guess I'm not understanding this question. My son has ADHD. I need advice. What strategy can I use to better help me? I guess you just need, just in general, I'm assuming the question, you know who, I don't want to say your name necessarily, but It depends. Try to be a little more specific as to specific advice that you need for this particular problem. They did both of my babies like this and refused evals at our old school, so my son is repeating kindergarten and my daughter is failing first grade. Well, that doesn't sound good. Well, repeating kindergarten is probably the only grade that seems like acceptable to repeat. It seems like the schools wax and wane on whether or not they're going to let someone repeat or not. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But again, for these evaluations, don't let them get away with it. You need to document. I'm assuming that your son didn't do well in kindergarten. And again, also know and remember that that's not so bad because our kids are developmentally immature. And, you know, depending on what you read, they're anywhere from 3 to 5 years behind their peers. So, you know, he's in kindergarten, he's immature. It's a little bit scary because I don't really know why they suggested repeating kindergarten. If it's based on any of the symptoms of ADHD and any learning disability that he might have, obviously that's not going away in first grade. So that's a little bit concerning. I would get my ducks in order while he's in kindergarten and get that evaluation. And I would document everything that happened in the first go around in kindergarten, everything that's happening now. And that includes, I would assume, possibly there might be behavioral issues. Hugely document those. And anything else. And the same with your daughter as well. I think that, again, you need to document everything that's going on. And, you know, I think that I've not seen any problem once you document. I keep saying document, I know. But it's really important. Once you write down everything that you as a parent is seeing, that you're saying, like, for instance, your daughter's failing first grade, what grade, in the grades that your child is getting, you know, what areas they're getting them in. Just really important to write all that down so that, you know, you can achieve what you need. Our school does RTI, and she has for 2 years now. And my daughter continues to fall through the cracks. She's not the only one, is all I hear. She's not the only one. Okay, so I guess, again, in that case, 2 years for RTI? No, that's not good. I don't know what grade she's in, but I would say that RTI, if you see evidence that RTI is not helping, and you apparently do, then go after an evaluation. Don't listen to, she's not the only one. Well, obviously she's not the only one. In any given class, there's going to be 2 or 3 kids with ADHD and some with learning disabilities too, and they've all been falling through the cracks. So you're there to care about your daughter, and you need to get her some help. So I would be real concerned about that, and in the letter point out the fact that RTI has been going on for 2 years, and get documents about what she has and has not achieved, and what's currently going on now in the classroom, and what you see at home. That's really important too, what you see at home regarding homework and the amount of help she needs and gets, and how long she takes to do it. All of those things are really important. But don't listen to that anymore. Just, let them know in a letter what you see, what you want, when you want the meeting, by specified date, and they have to respond. Let me see if there's any other questions. It's just so unbelievable in these times that our kids are struggling so much and they don't need to be. Let's see if there's any other new ones, or does anybody have follow-ups from what I've said that you didn't understand, or you need something else answered? No, you're not supposed to have a black screen. I'm relatively new at this particular software, so I need to change that. So not too sure how to fix it though. Maybe if I refresh it. Okay, so I don't know. Hopefully you still hear me. I'm just trying to get back to where I was here. Sorry guys, I'm trying to come back. Hold on. Hold on one second. Okay, well, I think I'll close out now. We've been running a long time. We're over. Please know that you can always reach out and email me for any other questions that you have. And I want to thank you so much for being here. And again, remember that you can, hopefully you clicked on the link to reach out to me for a free 30-minute coaching session. And I will be following up with you on an email shortly as well. Again, thank you so much for being here. And I hope you can take something back with you to help you with your journey. So again, I'll follow up with everyone tomorrow via email and ensure that I've answered everyone's questions. Thank you. Have a great night.